So it's going to be introduction to flop overbets, and specifically we're going to talk about in position, mainly in position versus the big blind, right? And it's going to be a fairly interactive talk. So if you guys have any questions, just let me know. Okay. So today's learning outcome, we're just going to talk about the rationale behind overbetting on the flop itself. So as you guys probably already know, overbets on the turn of the river are relatively common in modern play. But now we're going to talk about overbetting on the flop. And then we're going to also talk about exploitative overbetting. All right, so let's go for a bit of a warm up. So who can answer some of these questions?
I can answer the first two.
Yeah.
An overbet is a sizing above what the current pot is, and no to 100% pot.
So you can go with 100% pot. It's not an overbet.
No.
Okay, so it's 101% pot an overbet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So an overbet, it's specifically if we give it a definition of anything above the pot, then even 101% or 100.000 whatever 1% is still going to be an overbet. All right. Now, does anyone want to try and have a tackle about why we would overbet, just in general?
I got a couple ideas, if it's okay.
Yep.
Okay, well, we can get more EV, or we can extract more value with our strong hands. We can get more fold frequency or fold equity with our bluffs. We can put villain in a tough spot with the majority of its range, and it also gives us the ability to play for stacks in a single raise pot.
Yeah, so those are all great reasons behind overbetting. In single raise pots, the biggest reason why you would use an overbet is the ability to play for stacks, and then after that, it's got to do with maximizing the expected value of your strongest hands. In terms of putting your opponent in a tough spot and being able to maximize your forward equity and bluffing and stuff, those are all considerations. But in terms of the mathematics behind it and the numbers, it doesn't really impact your EV too much. But those kinds of considerations does make you a much tougher person to play against in most people's eyes. So your ability to use overbets at the right time just makes you bloody hard to play against. And yeah, so when you just think about overbetting, it's just really anything above the size of the pot. So a relatively small overbet would be like 110% or 120%, and I would consider anything less than 150% of the pot a small overbet. A relatively medium-sized overbet is between 150 and 3 times the pot, and then over 3 times the pot, you're starting to get onto the large size of overbetting, right? So does that make sense for people? Of course, it's a continuum, but if I say a small overbet, medium overbet, large overbet, you sort of know what I'm meaning when I say things. All right. All right. So we'll talk about some overbetting at equilibrium. At equilibrium, overbetting on the flop is actually very common, and it's actually quite common in single raise pots where the stack to pot ratio is large. And it's common in the sense that small overbets are being used at a relatively high frequency. If you run some sims with some bet sizes around the pot, right, and the sim will often use quite a few of them. So if you run a sim with 2 sizes, 180% of the pot and 120% of the pot, as well as some other sizes, instead of just the regular stock standard 100%, in sims where it uses 100% quite frequently, when you change it from a single 100% bet size to 2 bet sizes, one below and one above, both of them will be used quite often. So say you have a 40% frequency of a pot-sized bet in a sim, and then you run a slightly bigger sim with 80% and 120%, it might be something like 20% and 20% in terms of using the 0.8 pot and the 1.2 pot.
Okay.
Does that make sense to people? So basically what I'm saying is wherever you see 100% pot bet size, you can throw in small overbets from time to time.
I'm gonna have to rerun my whole button versus big blind database.
Yeah, and as the stack pot ratio becomes deeper, the overbets in general become larger. Of course, those overbets are going to be even more frequent later on in the tree, but you'll see more stuff like more pot size betting, and when you have pot size betting, we just discussed, you almost always have the ability to go for some small overbets. All right, so moving on to specifically the imposition versus big blind and single raise pot. In these situations, the flop types for overbets for, well, I guess medium sizes, for medium overbets, or what most people consider a large bet size, is where the imposition player has a nut advantage over the big blind. And the specific flop textures, which we'll be looking at, are ones where we have a rag flop where it is quite difficult for the big blind to have made a two-pair hand or stronger. Right? On connected flops and paired boards and monotone flops, is actually relatively easy for the big blind to have a relatively strong hand, and the nut advantage from imposition is quite diminished. The only place where you see where the imposition has quite a large nut advantage over the big blind is rag flops, which luckily for people who like to play in position is the majority of flops. So the majority of flops are rag flops, and a relatively large subset of them, it's very difficult for the big blind to have made any two-pair hands, many two-pair hands. And so on those kinds of flops, we can go for some overbets at equilibrium. All right, so I'll test you guys' knowledge of ranges. So you want to answer this question? So the button opens to big blind small and folds and big blind calls. On which of these flops here, I've got 10 flops here, would the big blind have a less than 2% in their range, two pair or better? All right. So when you're starting out with flop over bets, you really want to be able to eyeball these types of flops. Does anyone want to have
ace? Yeah, so ace jack 7, less than 2%.
I would guess. Sorry, I would guess 8-4-3 and 10-3-2 and jack 5-2 would be like the lowest.
Yeah, do you want to explain why?
Yeah, just because they don't have any of the offsuit two pairs on those boards. Like they're not defending. Let's like on 8-4-3, they don't have 8-4 off, 8-3 off, 4-3 off. So they really have. I mean, they have the sets, and then they'll have, I think, 8-4 and 8-3 suited, I believe, because I think they have all the suited stuff, and then 4-3 suited. But that's basically it. Same with 10-3-2 and jack 5-2.
Yeah, that's right. So those three pop out at you, right? So the ones where they just don't have any offsuit combinations of two pairs are often the ones where they don't have much two pair better at all, right? So in contrast, ace jack 7, right? This is a board where the button might have quite a lot of two pairs, but so does a big blind, even though some of those would be through a preflop. They have all of the A7, they have almost all of the ace jack, right? They should have a fair chunk of jack 7. So it's not really a board where the big blind is devoid of 2-pair in that range. All right. What do you guys think of the other ones? So we discussed 4 of them so far.
So the queen 7-5, all those more dry like rag ones are kind of tough to have. Like 8 or king 8-5. I don't know if they defend king 8 off, king 5 off, queen 7 off, queen 5 off. But my guess would be the next one.
I mean, if they do defend, they'd probably be the suited combos, right? So maybe not as many combos.
Yeah, so that would be my guess. All those, I guess queen 7-5 would be like the next best one. Although they might have 7-5 off, so maybe king 8-5 is. Those two are probably close. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the ranges. And then I think queen 9-2 and 9-7-2, they have both the. I think they're gonna have both 9-7 off and queen 9 off, so they'll hit those just a little bit better. And then all the ace high ones, they just have all the ace X offsuit, so they'll have all those 2 pairs. Actually, the one that we didn't talk about though is the king queen 3. And actually, that one could be pretty tough for them to have 2 pair because king queen's going to get 3-bet a lot pre-flop, and then they're not going to have king 3 off or queen 3 off.
Yeah, so this is a pretty good assessment. And what do you guys think of ace king 4?
Yeah, so like what? I mean, I think a lot of the ace king combos are going to be 3-bet. Ace 4 offsuit. They would have, big blind would have quite a few of those. King 4 suited. So maybe not as many combos there.
Yeah, so we can have a look at. So this is say the range. This is on Jack 8-3, but let's just say this is the range. So we're just looking at the range versus a 2x. This is the one that I have up on the Zenith website. In practice, it'll be slightly different from this, but roughly this. Basically, boards where 2 cards are in the black area. Right, they don't have as many 2 pairs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also another thing that you should note: rainbow boards, they will have slightly less 2-pair than 2-tone boards, because on rainbow boards there's less suited combinations of 2-pair. Right, so it's really only difference between I think one combo, but it does make a difference when you consider the next thing which we're going to be talking about, which is alpha first. All right, so we're talking about alpha. So you guys remember this from basic teaching. So alpha is the size of the bet divided by the pot plus the size of the bet. Right, now in a single raise pot between the big blind and the button, what is alpha for shoving? Someone calculate it.
I think it's 95 or 0.956.
Yeah, so it's around 0.956. Okay, so if you shove all in right on the river for whatever reason, when the pot is 4.5 and the stacks are 98, you would expect your opponent to alpha means that your opponent would at equilibrium try and fold around 95.6% of the time. So they're calling a little over 4% of the time. All right, so knowing that, let's think about this question. So the button opens to 2 big blinds with pocket nines, 1 folds and big blind calls, and we've got 8-4-3 rainbow. Can the button win more than the pot by shoving the 98 big blinds into 4.5? Just eyeballing it, what do you guys think?
Well, I would guess no, because we're going to get folded some 90% of the time, which is we're going to win the pot that amount, and then.
Well, I think because didn't we just say on 8-4-3 they have 2 pair or better less than 2% of the time? Like that was like the question before. So I think basically what this is saying, and they have to call you. What did we just say? Just like around 4%. So they're going to have to call you with hands worse than pocket nines to prevent you from like to meet MDF. So I think pocket nines, if you just jam, would get called by worse at least some percent of the time, I think is what the question's asking.
Yeah, so when I ask a question like this, can you win more than the pot by shoving? That's basically meaning if you shove, will your opponent call with a range that we have more than 50% equity against? Right? Because remember, we only needed them to. We need them to call worse 1/2 the time, and then that will win us half of the pot when they call, right? If we've got 50% equity, and we need to have slightly more than 50% equity in order to win the entire pot, or at least the pot when we shove. Does that make sense? So let's say they fold 96% of the time, and when they call 4% of the time, we've got 50% equity against them. So when we have 50% equity against them, we win half of the pot, so win half of the 4.5, right? And then we have the remaining 96% of the time, we win the pot. So we don't actually win more than the pot in that situation when we have 50%, exactly 50% equity, right? We win almost the pot. We win the pot 96% of the time, and we also win half of the remaining 4%. So we win 0.98 of the pot by shoving. Okay, which is still a lot, but it's not. It doesn't say yes to answering this question. We would actually need to evaluate whether we have how much more equity we have than 50%, or how much less equity we have than 50%. Okay. So if we think that we have 60% equity against the calling range, and they only call 4% of the time, then in that scenario, we win 60% of the 205 big blinds, which means that whenever they call, we would win an additional 20 big blinds. That's 60% of 200, so 120, and we've risked 98. So we're an additional 20 big blinds. And so in those scenarios, we do win more than the pot. And we don't actually have to have that much more equity than 50% in order to win more than the pot overall.
Mm-hmm.
We only need a few percent more.
Right.
So just know that nines, there is basically quite a flaw to the expected value that nines can have on boards like this, right? So when you think about it, like you might feel that nines is quite dicey because so many turns can bring an overcard or complete a draw, but there is a lower limit to how much either you can win with nines, right? How much of this pot you can win with nines, because you can just shove. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is this all assume that you have, like, that you're balanced or whatever, or it doesn't even matter?
There's not really what we're talking about now. We can talk about balance later.
Okay.
Right, which is probably the next bit we're talking about. But a lot of the hands that we want to be overbetting can answer this question as a yes or like a maybe yes, depending on what the range construction is like. And so those hands which we do overbet are actually quite strong, even if they don't appear strong. Right, so nine is just one pair, but it's actually a bloody strong hand here. Yeah.
Because of the lack of 2 pairs in the range.
Yeah, there's not very much 2 pair at all in your opponent's range. Right, you might be afraid of an overcard coming on the turn, and then your nines is not good anymore. But this is one of the situations where we can actually use an overbet, quite a large overbet, to make that not a big problem. Okay.
Thomas, why is the focus on the the 2 pair? How many 2 pairs they have and not the sets? Is it because of the combos in total, or?
It's because of what we just calculated here for alpha. Right. So if we just shove, right, get a 90, we just shove the 98 big blinds in. They've got they have to continue around 4.5% of the time, right? If we just shove. Okay. And we got to know that where the top 4.5% of our opponent's range is, and a lot of that top 4 to 4.5% will be 2 pair. So if your opponent has 2 pair 4.5%, well, we can't shove anything weaker than a set and win more than the pot, can we? But if our opponent only has 1.5% 2 pair or better, then it's actually quite easy to find a lot of hands which can shove and win more than the pot, right? Because the opponent's range is actually quite weak there. There's no nut hands in it.
And the nine combos of sets are going to be a very, very small fraction of the range.
Yeah. It's almost inconsequential at that stage.
Okay, so
there's not actually going to be 9. There's 6 combos of sets. We can actually have a look at the flop if you want. Now, I'll just touch on the next slide first. So when we're looking at the bluffs which you want to use, we want to have equity against the calling range. All right, and this includes hands with just backdoor equity, and obviously hands with more equity are going to be used at a higher frequency. So let's have a look let's go back and have a look at this 8-4-3 if we want. If you guys happy with that, we can look at that now. Okay, so this is 8-4-3. So in terms of percentages, you can click into the percentages. We can see that 2 pair or better on 8-4-3 is a little over 2% of the time. It's 2.04% of the time, which is not a lot. Remember that if we shove, they have to continue with 4.3%. So like if we did shove like nines, we might be able to get 50% quite easily against the calling range, and possibly even more than 50% if our opponent has to defend even larger than that. So if we look at the strategy using with just a 2x pot bet size, so with just a 2x pot bet size, this is a relatively medium-ish overbet size. You've got nines always being overbet. Okay, here right now, if you look at the amount of equity that nines has it says it's only got 77% equity, right? But we know that where nines is in both players' ranges, nines is like near the top. It's like around the top 0.98 of our opponent's range, right? So it's in the top. It's in the top 98%, 97% of our opponent's range, but it's only got 77% in equity, right? So how do you make up for that difference in equity compared to where it is in the range, right? The answer is you overbet. Does that make any sense to people?
No,
you
no,
lost
I
me
don't. Yeah, you kind of lost me a little bit.
Sorry, I heard some no's, I heard some yeses.
No, I was going to say you lost me there, Thomas.
All right. So looking at our opponent's range, look our opponent has 9s a bit of the time. Okay. So if we rank all of our opponent's hands, yeah, you can get out the pen and paper. That's good. All right. If we rank all of our opponent's hands, sets is the top 1.1% and 2 pair is the next 0.94%. So bring it out. We can see that where the overpair is, right, in terms of our opponent's range, it's in the plus 1.1, right, and then we just subtract 100. So it's in the top 97, right, in terms of like the percentile of where 9s is if we just do a ranking of all hands, right? So our pocket 9s or all of our overpairs are going to be in our opponent versus our opponent's range somewhere between top pair and 2 pair, right? Roughly, yeah. So they're all going to be around 98% in terms of the relative ranking. But if you look at just the equity of that these overpairs have, 9s only has around 80% equity and 10s and jacks and stuff. They only have around 80% equity. And that difference is the reason why there's such a difference is because of the overcards in the opponent's range, which can try and outdraw you.
Okay.
Yeah. So in order to make the difference between having an 80% equity hand and a 98% percentile hand, right, 98% ranking hand, you use an overbet. You just get rid of all of those overcards in your opponent's range, and so your equity will remain the same when you overbet, basically. But yeah, your equity will basically remain the same through the overbet, or we might even improve through the overbet because you've ended up folding out quite a few hands in your opponent's range.
So, yeah, so if I understand right, there's 2 advantages of doing this. One of them is folding out the overcards in the opponent's range, and the other is because of alpha, you're forcing your opponent to an optimal opponent to continue with hands that are weaker than your 9s.
Yeah. So we know how strong 9s is, right? So 9s doesn't feel strong because we only have 80% equity, right? But it is actually, if we look at where it's ranked in our opponent's range, in the top 98% of hands, right? Like we lose only 2% of hands, 2.1% of hands or whatever, and we beat everything else. So knowing that we can get outdrawn with this hand, but the hand is very strong in terms of where it's ranked, right? We don't lose to very much in our opponent's range. We're ahead of a lot of hands, but a lot of other hands have equity against us. We can use an overbet, right? We're ahead of not just a lot of hands, we're ahead of almost all hands. Yeah. This is different to when we might have a paired flop or whatever. In those situations, we might not have as much equity. So we might have a roughly the same amount of equity, but our ranking is a lot lower in our opponent's range because of our opponent's trips and stuff, right? So knowing that, we can't really do this. Like folding our opponent's hands is just going to have us run into the top of our opponent's range too often. Here, an overbet, we're not going to end up running into the top of our opponent's range, just because the top of our opponent's range is so weak, right? There's not a lot in there that beats us. So we can overbet, we fold out all of those overcards, all the equity of all those overcards, and we get called by a bunch of worse stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
So
how does that affect value going forward then?
Yeah, so your valor is actually still going to be higher. Because overcards don't really do too much. So if we look at the turn reports, here we can see all the hands which our opponents will donk an undercard. So actually, when an overcard comes, that's pretty good for us. So like we can have a quick peek at what happens when like a queen comes or whatever. So I'll let that run. But if you look at our opponent's range, like a queen doesn't really improve too many hands in their range, right? Obviously, it's going to give us some more two pairs, but like there's only going to improve queen jack and king queen now, right? So here now, where it is in our opponent's range, right? We would still have nines, but the hands that beat us now are around 12% of our opponent's range, but the SPR is only 4 now. So you can redo the same math that we had before in terms of alpha. Okay, so you've got 22.5 divided by 89 plus 22.5. Okay, 20%. That's 1 minus alpha, right? So 1 minus alpha is going to be 20%. So knowing that if we beat the top 10% of our opponent's range, we can actually just shove now, right, and win more than the pot. That's not necessarily the strongest play with that hand, but that's just something that you can consider doing. So where that would be is just like a weak 2 pair, right? You might not even have any of those. But if we look at nines again, nines can still bet. And if we looked at the equity from before and after, nines had 77% equity. And after an overbet, we only went from 77 to 74. So we didn't lose much equity by overbetting nines. Similarly with tens and jacks. Right. Yeah, so nines can still bet. Right. Here's some different, but you can still bet. And then I guess it will, number 2 is probably not a great card. Check back the river kind of thing when the overcard comes.
Is it mostly the vulnerable overpairs, Thomas, that are overbetting, or are like aces?
Yeah.
And
So if we
kings?
have a look, so most when you have this is the most extreme example that we have in The Sims, but you can look at other ones, even 9-4-3. It's pretty similar to 8-4-3, of course, right? Overbetting tens is not just tens, also ace 9 and stuff like that. So it's not just the other pairs. I was going to use this opportunity to talk to someone about something else. Jack 5-3, you can have a small overbetting range, 3%. All right. When we're considering which hands we want to overbet, so let's have a look at 10-4-3. Actually, let's have a look at something else. Yeah, let's have a look at 10-4-3. So 10-4-3, so you can use jacks and stuff. But we want to look at hands which we want to overbet as a bluff. So we just talked about using hands which have some equity against the calling range. I think 8-4-3 would be easier to see than that because the overbetting range is quite large. So using this as an illustrative example, if you look at all of the unmade hands in the overbetting range, so in the dark blue, you just have even just 2 overs can be used as an overbet. Because remember, once we overbet the 2 overs, our opponent doesn't have those overcards in our opponent's range anymore, right? So they don't have those overcards. So when a jack or queen comes, if we overbet queen jack, our hand is actually very strong.
Yeah.
Still, yeah. So it fully maximizes the draw power of those 2 overcards.
It's sort of like you're getting through overbetting. You're kind of getting well, you got 6 outs, but you've got 6 guaranteed outs because you're folding out your opponent's overpairs.
Yeah, overcards. Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah.
What else is there? So obviously, this is the open end of there, and hands with the backdoor flush draw, and other backdoors are going to be used more often. All right. So there's 10-9 is always 10-9 with a backdoor. Is always bet and is overbet quite frequently at over 75% of the time. So like a 10-9 hand has 2 overcards, which we know are probably going to be good after our opponent calls if we hit one of those overcards. A backdoor straight draw and a backdoor flush draw. So all of this equity that we have, the 6 outs plus essentially 2 additional backdoor outs we can use, right? So if we think about 8 outs, we've got 34% equity there. And almost all that 34% equity is actually pushed when we overbet, right? Is used effectively when we overbet.
So Thomas, if we get raised in this spot, I know on a lot of boards, like having the imposition player doesn't really have a 3-bet range, but in this spot, would it make sense to
there's
just
quite a 3-bet range, yeah.
Yeah, you just get it in.
If you do get raised, you can basically get it in with the other pairs that we have. Isn't he? It's not getting it in. It's clicking it back and then having our opponent get it in for us when they continue.
Gotcha.
And then we just snap it off. I mean, we won't be like happy calling.
Yeah.
But we still have more than 50% equity against this shoving range. So, like, obviously, EV isn't going to be amazing because we put our entire stack in and we only win 50 chips back. But that happens because our opponent has the top of their range. So whenever they raise, we're running at the top of their range. But yeah, whatever. Yeah, so we'll often re-raise the vulnerable over pairs when we have an overbetting strategy on boards like this. Now the other board type which I wanted to show you guys was that one is the so this one is the type of the one sort of middling card and then 2 undercards, then two weak cards, and it's hang on, just get counted. Yeah, so 2 or basically here, two of the cards are within this, so that they've got basically no pairs. Sorry, no 2-pair hands, right? So you've got one high, middling, and then two low cards, which makes it difficult for them to have any 2 pairs at all. Is that all I wanted to say about this? Yeah, just watch the spacing between the two lower cards, because you could run into 2 pairs using these offsuit connectors and gappers, which they could have. Right, so we're thinking like a 10-4-3, right? A 10-5-2, 10-4-2, 10-3-2, right? These offsuit hands down here, they're not going to have. So if it's like 10-6-3, right? They don't have 6-3 offsuit, and they don't have 10-3 offsuit, right? So you can just look at this range and think about which boards are going to be good in terms of that sense. But like if they have like a queen 6-4, I mean that looks good, but they have 6-4 offsuit some of the time, right? Which makes it a little bit less appealing.
Thomas, you said something about rainbow flops being more advantageous as opposed to two-tone because of the
because they will have one less combination of 2-pair. Right, so you can imagine these 2-pair combinations here. If it was rainbow, they would have an extra one, right? So here there's only two combinations, but if it was rainbow, they'd have an extra combination or 2 there somewhere.
Right.
And that actually makes quite a bit of difference in terms of how effective your overbets are going to be, because you're dealing with the thin end of your opponent's range here. The very, very top is what you're scared of when you're using these overbets. So the other board which I wanted to show you was, you can look at boards like that. The other board that I wanted to show you was stuff like ace king 4, ace queen, whatever. And the reason being is because your opponent doesn't have any ace king, and it's difficult for your opponent to have much ace queen as well as the upper 2 sets. So here on ace king 4, there's quite a bit of 2-pair in your opponent's range, but relative to all the other ace high boards, there's actually not that much. On most ace high boards, your opponent will have a fair bit of 2 pairs, so that you can't be overbetting them to death at equilibrium. We'll talk about exploits in a bit. But on stuff like ace king 4, ace queen 7, stuff like that, the top two and the top two sets, so top two pair and top two sets, will be all yours. And so you can use them in your overbetting range. So we'll have a look. Here's what the overbetting range looks like. So ace king, right, which we thought we would use. Obviously, top two pair, your opponent just doesn't have it. Very difficult for your opponent to continue. Here on the previous board, we had we didn't have that much. Our record was only around 80%, but our range was around the hand in our range was close to 98%. Here even an ace queen has that sort of thing going for it, right? An ace queen is going to be in the top 97% of our opponent's range, right, in terms of percentiles, and we've only got 87% in equity. So there is a bit of that going on here. But what's more important is like a hand like ace king, which our opponent doesn't have. Ace king is only beat by 0.5% of our opponent's range right now. Yeah, so it's only beat by these three combinations of sets, which is 0.49% of our opponent's range. Knowing that ace king sets up a really good nuts versus air scenario, essentially. Right here, ace king, we have the effect of nuts. With only 100 ones deep, we can just shove ace king and be very happy about what our EV is going to be when our opponent calls, because our opponent has to call quite a bit with worse hands. A lot of worse hands. But here we're basically setting up a very nice nuts versus air situation, and we can start that off with an overbet. To deny as much equity as we can from even just backdoor stuff and like these gut shots here. So when we overbet, this is sort of what our opponent needs to continue with. We can see it's very difficult for opponent to continue with overbet. They have to fold all the offsuit kings, right? They have to hold on with some aces, even folding some aces, folding a bunch of their fours, right? It's very difficult for them to continue with any hands. And they have to like float these gut shots, because if you don't, whenever the gut shot comes, we're just way ahead with everything. Like the ace king doesn't care if your opponent has a gut shot. That hit in that situation. So for example, if your opponent folded all these offsuit gut shots, whenever a queen jack or 10 comes, our opponent just gets wrecked, because then we have the offsuit gut shots as well, right? Which is then the nuts versus our opponent. In terms of bluffs in this situation, right, we can look at all the unmade hands. Obviously, all the gut shots are going to be used at relatively high frequency, but also just some backdoor draws, right? So here, 10-9 with double backdoor, in terms of you got backdoor straight draw with king 9 and backdoor flush draws, right, with the board. So 10-9, jack 9, like 7-6 has backdoor straight draws, some weaker backdoor flush draws. Queen 3, backdoor straight draw with a 3, backdoor close to nut flush draw, so backdoor flush draws with their suitedness. On the other hand, Queen 8, not quite as good, because its showdown value is a little bit stronger, and it doesn't have as many good backdoor straight draws, right? And these offsuit hands, they're very rarely used, just because they don't have as much of the backdoor flush stuff going for them. Other things to note is that we're bluffing a 4. Yeah, all right. Just because a 4 is actually the only type of hand with quite a few outs. So obviously there's the gut shots which have 4 outs, but a 4 actually has 5 outs against a pair. So like if we have 6-4 or 5-4 or like jack 4, we've got 5 outs against an ace to make our 2 pair or trips, and versus a gut shot only has 4 outs with some backdoor stuff. Yeah, so I'll show you that So here the combinations of two pairs, so it's 12.5 plus, so 12.5 combinations of two pair on the Ace King 4. But if we look at Ace King 3 two tone, we get 13 in a bit. So there's an extra one combination of two pair basically when it's two tone versus a rainbow, and that does affect the overbetting frequencies by quite a bit. There's other reasons why two tone will affect the overbetting frequency, mainly because of the presence of a flush draw and when to use that equity and having your opponent raise you with a flush draw kind of stuff. But yeah, it does give your opponent an extra two pair combination to work with to defend. So I know we went through quite a bit there. Does anyone have any questions?
So I'm just looking at the 32% frequency for overbet, and then you've got the 16% for the quarter pot bet, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's almost like a lot of this fashionable downsized betting. It seems like from what you're showing here, that's going to quickly become old school.
Yeah, but betting small with 100% of your range on Ace King 4 is not. It's no longer in vogue. No longer in vogue. So we got Ace Queen 2, very similar story, right? Because your opponent has difficulty finding much Ace Queen to defend with, and Ace King is still quite good. But then when we get to Ace Jack, there is still a fair bit of overbetting, mainly because we have Ace King and Ace Queen, but our opponent starts to find more Ace Jack in their range to defend with, and then Ace 10, even worse for us, right? Because they have even more two pairs at that stage, right? Now here we're not even using an overbet at equilibrium. Okay, what else is there?
So the button is, I'm sorry, the big blind is rarely raising these overbets.
Yeah, so here on the Ace King 4, like they're very rarely raising. They got 2.3% raise frequency, right? And here we continue most of the call because our hands don't have, like, we're going to be in a way behind situation essentially. Versus on the other one, on the 8, on the 8-4-3, opponent raises. We have quite an extensive re-raising range because we want to be denying equity at that stage.
Okay.
Also because our opponent will have raised to deny equity from us. So go back and so any questions about that? So we looked at 8-4-3, 10-4-3 is a pretty similar story.
Thomas, on the
overbetting,
is there any reason, or do you know why on the ace? I'm looking at the Ace King 3 with the flush draw, and it never chooses the quarter pot bet, but then on Ace King 4 rainbow, it picks the quarter pot at a pretty high frequency, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's probably going to be a different. That's not got anything to do much with overbetting. That's mainly just because it's a flush draw.
Gotcha.
And in order to get equity from flush draws, using a bigger bet size is better. Yeah, on Ace Queen 5, so we've got a small bet there.
Yeah. Okay, never mind.
So yeah.
Weird.
I think the major difference is here we can get raised by Ace Queen, and so opponent's going to have a re-raising range with a bunch of hands as well. And then we can have a bet the turn when it bricks, which was the topic of the previous overbetting tutorial, which hopefully some of you guys have seen or were at. All right, now we're going to talk.
How big were these sims, Thomas, that you ran in gigabytes?
This is 133.
Jeez. Yeah. I'm watching this thing on my lame laptop with 8 gigabytes. Oh man.
Yeah, so I mean, you can be very relatively confident that I'm not talking shit. All right, next bit. What do I want to do? Okay, this is going to the exploitative part of the talk. All right, let's talk about this. Okay, first off, is this a board that you think your opponent should have? So this is a board that you think the opponent should have. The big blind should have a lot of 2 pairs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So big blind's going to have basically all the offsuit combinations of 2 pairs. So it's going to have a lot of 2 pairs going on. So knowing that, when the big blind checks, the button bets twice the pot, and the big blind calls, which turn cards should the big blind have a donking range on?
Which turn card should the big blind have a donk?
On any straight completing card. So like a 4, a 3, a 2.
I think a 5 and a 6 for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Thinking about the bluffs that Button would be overbetting with. So any turn card that brings a draw, that brings a flush draw. So any spade, diamond, or club.
Okay, so we've got anything completing anything and any spade, diamond, or club. So that's a lot, yeah. So you guys are just listening like half a deck. All right, let's have a look at it.
I think considering the bluffs that you'd have when you're overbetting, my answer of any straight completing card should be
so we just talked. So we just talked about equilibrium overbetting, and here we're talking about exploitative overbetting. So we just went through saying that it doesn't make sense to overbet this board equilibrium because of the 2 pairs.
Right.
And you're right about the bluffs having to have equity in terms of backdoors and straights and stuff. And straight draws and stuff like that. So that's correct. But we can look here using the sim that I've run. It won't give you the turn because there isn't an overbetting range here. Or if there is, it's like got no combos in it. But we can look at the turn report, and then have a look at which turns there should be a donking range on. And if we actually look at it, the smallest, the turn which is most checked is the jack of spades, right? So that's basically saying that all turns the big blind should have a donking range of some sort on all turns on this board. So knowing that, if your opponent doesn't donk, what does that mean for your bluffs? Like if they don't donk at all on any turn?
You get to check back and realize more equity.
Yeah. So you get to realize twice the amount of equity that you could if your opponent had a donking range than if your opponent had a donking range, essentially. Right? Because your opponent donked, then you have to fold because you've got like 3 outs to beat anything, and then yeah, it's not good. But here, if your opponent doesn't donk, you can always just check back. So exploitatively, against an opponent that doesn't donk, we can start using overbets. Maybe not overbets of twice a pot, maybe just like a small overbet or stuff like that. Maybe something like 1.5 or 1.25. and it becomes difficult for your opponent to try and figure out what's going on, just because they have to donk so often, right, to get you to stop checking back.
Right.
Yeah. So your bluffs are going to be stronger when your opponent doesn't donk, and so you can do strange stuff exploitatively, where you end up bluffing as an overbet, but not having any value hands. Right, because you're exploiting your opponent's ability to not donk the turn.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so how can we use overbets to exploit these players? Do you guys want to have a chat about it? So how can we use the flop overbet to exploit players who fold too much, call too much, raise too little, and donk too little?
So
how
fold
you
too
guys
much, always overbet, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Call too much. Obviously, maybe widen your value range a little bit and don't bluff. Would that be right?
Yeah, so you basically underbluff. You underbluff when you're the opponent is calling too much.
Yep. You don't just
Can you
want to
slightly widen your value range, or is that not advisable? But you still stick to the value range.
Yeah. So say for example your opponent continued very well against a small or medium-sized bet, but against an overbet they just love to call. Then in that situation, when you have a strong hand or even a relatively strong hand, the EV of your overbetting is going to be way higher than betting the small size. So basically, all of your value from the small size can be used as an overbet instead.
Right. Okay.
And we can bet for thinner value as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So if say we had the 8-4-3 flop, where we had a 30% overbet frequency at equilibrium. So if it's 30% at equilibrium, roughly 10% of that is going to be value. But if your opponent calls too much, what could happen instead is that 15% of that would be value, and then all of the bluffs disappear because you're not going to be bluffing anymore, right? Essentially, or when you do be bluffing, you're only going to be bluffing the very, very strongest hands, which have a lot of implied odds, etc., against the opponent.
Raise too little against overbets. We can bet more and bet more bluffs. Is that right?
Yeah, it is actually a bit of both. You can just overbet more in general when your opponent doesn't raise enough, because you get to realize more equity with both your medium to strong hands, which you overbet, as well as all of your bluffs. So getting good. So say your opponent would raise at equilibrium around like 2 to 3% of the time. If you're playing as an opponent that doesn't raise at all, then suddenly overbetting becomes actually quite a bit better for you, because all your bluffs have that extra 2 to 3% that they wouldn't have had.
What would this be?
They're gonna all of your hands have an extra 2 to 3% because they can see the turn essentially for free. Well, not really for free. They don't have the risk of getting raised at all.
Okay.
Right. And so that 2 to 3% of the time, which they would have gotten raised, is now no longer a consideration. And so you get a 2 to 3% advantage by doing it. Right, which is enough to add quite a few hands into your overbetting range. And the last one, donking too little on different turns.
We can play more draws because we get to see more cards.
Yeah, exactly right. So you can add in more bluffs when you do have a bet.
Can I ask a question? Does our opponent being short stacked have any significant effect on our exploitive overbet?
Yeah. So we talked about first up having to have a deep SPR. So in order for overbetting to make any sense at all, the stack to pot ratio has to be relatively deep. So the sims that we looked at, the pot was 4.5 and the stacks was 98, and so you got an SPR of like 22 or something like that. So it's quite deep. When the SPR gets lower, right, overbetting makes less sense on boards like the Ace King 4, right? Because you don't have to overbet to get all the money in. You can play the nuts or air game without having to use a flop overbet, or at least not a flop overbet that is that large. But on the other hand, on the boards like the 10-4-3, 8-4-3 kind of stuff, where you have an overpair that's relatively vulnerable, when the SPR is low, the overpair can just shove and win more than the pot. Right? So you could get some stuff where you have a small shoving range specifically of just that overpair. Or maybe not a shoving range, maybe an overbet, or an overbet range where with just containing some overbetters for value, and then on the turn you get it in. Does that make sense? So that's talking like 50 big blinds deep or 40 big blinds deep or some tournament situations, right? Of course, in tournament situations there's like ICM and stuff, so overbetting doesn't make as much sense when there's ICM, because the amount that you win is worth more than the amount that you is worth less than the amount that you would have lost. So there's that. But in cash game, who cares about ICM, because there is no ICM. All right, any questions? I know I went through quite a bit.
Thomas, so SPR wise, I mean, when overbetting on the flop, I mean, is there kind of a rule of thumb for selecting an overbet size such that you get to like a target SPR on the turn? Like maybe your turn river could be pot. Like, do you want to get like to an SPR of 4, or is it just sort of there is no rule of thumb? You just have to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, if so it's got to do with planning out the hand, right? So we know that if you do a pot, you need an SPR of 4 on the turn. So if that's your plan with your nutted hands, overbet and then go pot, which sounds good to me, or overbet and go roughly pot. So overbet and pot the turn, and then if it's roughly pot on the river, then that's nice. You just figure out whatever size that you want to give an SPR of 4 on the turn,
right?
Roughly 4 on the turn. That makes more sense in terms of the nut versus air situation, where you have the Ace King 4, right, where like Ace King is so close to the nuts,
right?
You can play nuts versus air.
Yeah.
Different to the 8-4-4-3, where you have a vulnerable overpair. It's still very close to the nuts, but the overbetting is part because it's very strong, other part because you want to deny equity. Versus on the Ace King 4, it's not really to deny too much equity. It's more because you just have such a strong hand, and you want to play nuts versus air, or close to it.
Right. Okay.
Other things, so like you look at the sim. So we go back to like the 8-4-3. So you look at the sim and you can see, okay, it looks like this. I'm going to overbet this, and it's only got the 2x pot. But you can get more creative, right? You don't have to always use 2x pot, right? You can we just talked about exploitative overbetting, and a lot of times when you overbet, your opponent just has got no idea how to play the flop, not to mention the turns and rivers against overbet. Right? They just won't have any clue what they're doing. Right? So knowing that you don't have to be strict in terms of balance of every single size. So you could get funky with it and choose a range of sizes around 2 times the pot. So maybe you want to choose 1.8 today, and you can choose 2.3 tomorrow, and you can choose 3x on the second Tuesday of every month. right, etc. And then as long as you roughly have an idea of how to play the turns and rivers, your opponent will just have a tough time playing against you on spots like this, right? If you think about this sort of thing where the nines is more vulnerable than the tens and tens are more vulnerable than the jacks, etc., you can argue for overbetting nines for a slightly larger size than tens, right? And then have a different overbetting range according to the different parts of the value, and then balance that out, etc., etc. But it's very difficult for me to show you that because this sim is already 130 gigabytes large, right? If I wanted to add a variety of different overbet sizes, I'd have to have a much bigger computer. But I imagine that you would see nines overbetting at a higher frequency for a larger size than tens, than jacks, etc. So nines might be 3 times a pot, and then tens might be 2.5 times a pot, and then jacks might be 2 times a pot. In terms of the highest frequency that it uses, and then a bit of mixing into the different sizes. So you can do that as a consideration. You can think about that. Now, maybe another thing that we can talk about is following up your overbets. When you've made an overbet bluff against an opponent which you think has, like, we can go back to this. So say you've overbet bluffed against an opponent that you think folds too much against overbets, and they end up calling. What is the best way to continue once you've made an overbet bluff? Against this player.
Well, I think their range is very strong if they typically fold too much, and in this case they called. So I think on a turn you've got to, well, obviously proceed with caution and size your bets appropriately depending on the turn card.
Yeah, maybe no. So you're against a opponent which you thinks folds too much against overbets. So the way you adjusted against that player was to overbet more frequently with bluffs, right? You bluff load your overbets, right? And those bluffs can be quite junky, right? Now, once your opponent has called, you can be pretty sure that you have next to no equity going forward when you have a bluff.
Oh, right. So
You just give up. You give up completely.
Yeah.
You just give up completely. You can check back a lot, and then it's really only your value if you even have any value. You probably wouldn't against a player like this. You just give up completely, because the whole point against a player that folds so much against overbets was to overbet bluff them a lot, right? Your value you're not going to get any value from using your value hands by overbetting because they fold too much. Yeah. Once they call, you give up completely because you actually don't have any value.
Yeah.
That wants to play that way, right? Or if your opponent thinks that you do have value, they're going to be calling too much in general on the later streets. So any future bluffs are going to be bad. So once you've overbet bluffed against a player that folds too much and they call, just give up. And that's actually quite true in general when you overbet. If you overbet, say look at the this one again. In general, you're going to be checking and giving up a lot after they've called an overbet. So the queen is probably a good card, but yeah, the queen is probably too good of a card. What's a kind of a shitty card? Yeah, okay, let's just go with the three spades, which means that they should have a donking range of some sort. But basically, when you hit a brick, all of your range is going to give up. And when you do continue, you continue with quite a bit of polarity. So here they should have some donking range, but when they check, we just pot it when we want to continue, and then we check and give up a lot of hands. So if we look down here, if you can just see the colors here, this is the 50% line here, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of the stuff to the left of the 50% of value is betting again for value, right? So they times might bet and then check back. Of course, there's some checks and stuff like that, but a lot of it just gives up. So here, like a 9-6, it's tough to see what it can draw to. It's drawing to a 9, right? And that's it. Yeah, a lot of bluffs which don't make sense to continue bluffing, and those are from the flop, and so those should check back. Maybe they can realize some equity. Maybe say like a 9 comes and like that 9-6 is okay now. Right, where is it? 9-6? There it is. It can bet the value, but a lot of the time you're going to be giving up. Okay, so here when the 9 came, or we can look like a jack came, something like that. Even against a very small river probe, you're folding at quite a high frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so here the 2 is on the brick. So basically went brick after you've overbet. All your bluffs missed on the turn, and now all of those bluffs which you had on the flop didn't improve on the river. Of course, you're overfolding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is against a quarter pot bet. So a quarter pot bet with normal symmetric ranges, your alpha would be 20%. So you're only going to fold 20% of the time. But here in this spot, because of your very weak check back range, you're folding 71% of the time. And then when you check, you don't stab like a queen high, right? Because you don't have any value. So knowing that, it becomes pretty tempting on runouts like this to want to stab after they check the 3rd time. But like against the overbet, you're always behind and you don't have any value, so your opponent can exploit you by overcalling. Does that make sense? So here on this run out river, you're only betting 14% of the time because the rest of it is just air which missed from the flop overbet. So you're very air heavy here.
Yeah.
So that's quite a very common theme to how you play your bluffs after you've overbet and missed.
Right.
Or very often, unless the bluff still has a lot of equity against a continuing range, you're going to check back and give up.
Check back a lot, yeah. Hey,
And Thomas, in this case, just overcards can be like some of the best bluffs, right?
Yeah. So here, because their range still, here they're going to have some trips, but you actually folded out a lot of 3s and 4s on with your flop overbet. Yeah, right. So you bet the flop, and then here the 3s, and normally continue with the backdoor flush draw, and the 3 of spades comes. Yeah. So 2 overcards makes a good bluff because you've got 6 outs. It's almost as strong as an open ender, stronger than a gut shot certainly, because all you have to do is make a pair, right?
And if we make a pair, we value betting river.
Yeah. So here when they call, and the queen comes, you can probably jam king queen.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Because only pot size bet left, then the other bet left us with an SPR of just under 4, so you can go pot. Sorry, George, did you have a question?
Yeah, curious about on the flop, looking at the button's range, his total range, and then what his his equity overall, which is 53%, right? And I just wonder what his overbetting equity is. It's 54%, is that right?
Yeah.
53 and 54. And then EV, 3.1 and 2 versus, his overbetting EV is 3.1, isn't it?
Yeah. It's because the overbetting range has got all the very strong hands in it. So we can look at some similar-ish flops. So like a jack 5-3 here, like here's 5-3 off. So it's not amazing, right? In terms of percentages, it's got around 2%, 2 bet plus. But we can still have a small overbetting range. And if you're exploiting your opponent, like it's very important to know which flops you can have an overbetting range. And then if you know you have an opponent which just is not going to play very well at all against overbets, you can change your strategy to move more hands that are indifferent at equilibrium. So here you got a queen 4, which is indifferent between overbetting and using another size and checking, and using them in the overbet size because you know that's going to have a high EV. And so it could be exploitatively the case where here you've got a 3.4% overbet range at equilibrium. It could end up being like 15 or 30% against a player which you know that is going to have a tough time knowing how to defend. Right, you could end up overbetting quite a lot against players which just don't have the ability to defend well against an overbet. Right, and there's 4 things that we're talking about. They call too much, they fold too much, they don't raise enough, they don't donk enough. Right, and all of those they have to be able to do quite well. So here on Jack 5-3, we can look at the different turns which they want to be having a donking range. Right, obvious on a jack. I think most players can figure that out. But it might be difficult to see that they have to donk a 2 some of the time. Right, say we overbet and an 8 comes. You can have a look at how we're continuing at equilibrium and then how your opponent might have responded to that. So all the time when you overbet, players are going to... So there you got a small donking range. Probably wrong because of 50% rule, but yeah. Yeah, so a lot of your strong hands are just going to continue again, and then the rest is you're giving up. And then you have some small hands which check and then value the river. If checked 2. So in terms of the overbetting, it is actually pretty straightforward to play. If you know the types of flops that you want to overbet, you just go for an overbet and then just bet. Because the SPR becomes low enough after they call the overbet. There's no like tricky stuff in terms of like checking back the turn and then raising the river kind of stuff, which you would get if you have a small, when you start using small bets on the flop, right? You don't have to really learn those lines because they just don't happen very often. Often it's just bet. Right.
Yeah, Thomas, it seems as when it is correct to overbet on the flop, it seems the benefit of that is as we move through the turn and the river, we have like a much more well-defined idea as to what our range is and how to balance those streets better and to pick the right hands for the job. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, there's that. Also, you also define your opponent's range a lot as well. Right. It becomes pretty so like you overbet here on the Jack 5-3. You know they're just going to be continuing with pairs, right? They just the hands just aren't strong enough to continue against the overbet. Like they can't float you with the king 10. So like when a king or a 10 comes, like it doesn't matter. Like it's going to help you more than it helps your opponent. So you're not really worried about running into a king when the king comes. But you would worry about running into a jack running into trips when a jack comes, or running into trips when a 5 or a 3 comes, because you haven't folded out those hands yet.
So Thomas, on the note of defining your opponent's range, if you could bring up like the equity graph of what the opponent is calling with when you overbet. I mean, does it start to look very much like a bluff catcher range equity distribution, or? Yeah,
sort of. When they call,
it's getting there, right? I mean, more so than if you were to bet smaller, right?
Yeah, what's going on? Yeah, just a little bit. EV equity. Yeah, so like this is when they start. Where are we? Look, the flop equity isn't quite as important to see because like some hands are gonna, like here, ace 10, it's got more than 50% equity, but it folds.
Hmm.
All right, and that's gonna happen quite a bit. Like here, a 9-5 has got 55% equity in it. It's indifferent. Ace 5, it's got nearly 60% equity in it, and it's indifferent. So the 9's got 55% equity and it folds. So like the equity itself isn't as important. The flop, because like the flop, right? You're running an equity against range calculation, blah blah blah. It's not going to tell you whether or not you should call or fold, right?
Mhm.
The thing that should tell you to call or fold is your EV, right?
EV,
When certain cards come out, how does that impact my hand within my range? How does it impact your opponent's hand and your opponent's range, right? And then what do you get? What do you get from there? So like nines, there's just nothing that's gonna be good for nines, right? There's nothing happening there, even though it's got 55% equity.
Whereas having a 5, you've got outs to trips and
you just got more outs.
or 2 pair, or
and backdoor flush draws and stuff.
Backdoor, yeah.
Right. So say you overbet and you call and the 3 comes, and it goes check or whatever, and then a king comes. Like, in order for you to, in order for your, say you're the big blind, in order for you to profitably call the 3, your opponent has to be bluffing a lot, right? Like, if you look at it, like, how does it make sense that you just have bottom pair and you have 55% equity and they bet twice the pot?
Yeah.
Does it? Yeah, it doesn't make sense unless your opponent's bluffing a lot, like a lot,
Yeah.
right? So your opponent has to be bluffing a lot, and so knowing that, you have to also be bluffing a lot when you overbet. And after your opponent calls, their range is a lot stronger, and then you can check back the turn and stuff like that. So exploitatively, it's not just on boards that have a small overbetting frequency to start off with. It's also sometimes you can look at boards which just don't have an overbet range at equilibrium, and you can use that. So here on a7-4, if we bet twice the pot, we can look at how our opponent's going to continue. Right? They should continue. They should start folding some of their top pairs. So players might not do that. And they should still be floating some of their pairs, the middle and bottom pairs with the backdoor, right? Which some players might not do either. And so knowing that, it can be actually pretty easy for your opponent to overfold against an overbet. So here they must continue 25% of the time at equilibrium. But say they didn't fold, they say they didn't continue with any of the 7s or any of the 4s, right? And they didn't think that any of their gut shots were without a backdoor were worth it. Like then they're overfolding suddenly, and since they're overfolding, or even a few percent when using an overbet, you start to print when you have a bluff. Other things is that, say you had an ace king, right, and you overbet, and your opponent doesn't have any 7s or 4s in their range. When a 7 or a 4 comes, you can be pretty happy to just keep barreling when you have ace king, because their range is so well defined, right? So exploitatively, you can keep barreling because they don't have 7s or 4s for you to worry about.
So Thomas, as an exploit thing, if on like the 8-4-3 board again, it does, even if you knew your opponent was overfolding, would you want to do something different with hands like pocket 9s and pocket 10s? Like, would you want to bet smaller, or is just denying the equity by overbetting, even if you knew they were overfolding, will that have a higher EV than?
Yeah, I mean, it depends by how much they're overfolding. But if you can look at the EV of 9s and it's more than the pot, so you need to be able to get some value somewhere. Right? Obviously, if your opponent overfolds, like, you can't get value, right? Like, if your opponent always folds to any bet, then none of your hands are value hands.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I mean, like nines might just bet just because of accurate now, they might try and even bet small. Like it depends, like how much they overfold. Like if they overfold against a small bet as much as they do against a large, as much as they do against the overbet, then it might start to make sense to be checking nines. But
gotcha. So it gets to a point where if people are folding too much, then your value hands have higher EV and
high EV in some other line. So then you become very unbalanced when you start overbetting. Like you overbet all your bluffs, and then your value goes into like a half pot bet size. And
gotcha. And that's applicable on like any street, right? Like not just the flop.
That's on any street. But the flop is one of the nicest ones because most players just don't know what to do against the overbet.
I guess that's what makes money is how well our opponents are reacting to that bet size and the range we use when we're betting that size.
Yeah, definitely exploitatively, you can make a lot of money by starting to put flop overbets in your range. Yeah, practically, I would start off. I suggest you guys all to start off by downloading all the sims from the library and trying to find the ones which have at least some percentage of an overbet or flop overbet. Even you can look at some flops where maybe there is an overbet, but there's like a pot size bet used. So I think maybe King 7-5. So there's like a pot size bet used at some small frequency. And you can look at which hands do that. And then instead of going pot size, you can go 1.2 size the pot. Right. And all opponents will just like freak out at even a very small overbet and then struggle going forward. And it's not just on the dry rag boards that we looked at. There's other board types which you can do that with, right? Use a small overbet just to freak your opponent out a little bit.
I think over time, a lot of players have got used to the range bet. You know, the 1/3 range bet, and players that even study it know that they have to re-raise. They know they have to call wide, and they're getting a lot more used to it and a lot better at it. But when you present them with an overbet like this, they go right back to kindergarten again. And I think that's
exactly
that's a great option.
Yeah, I mean it's I have never seen it before anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So you can look at here. So here, Jack 8-3. There's like a 0.13% overbet frequency was twice the pot, and then there's like 5.12% of pot size bet. So like, if you're against an opponent that's not so great against overbets, you can just chuck in some. So you can look at the hands which go for 2x and 1.5, and then start using them for 2x and 1 times the pot. You can start using them for something like 1.5 or 1.2 or whatever you feel comfortable with, and then you slowly ratchet your overbet size upwards until you feel more comfortable overbetting. So here, this is an example of like a range bet plus overbet type spot. Here, you bet your entire range for one big blind, and then some of your hands are used in larger sizes, like 3/4 pot, small overbet. And to simplify that, if you wanted to, you could bet your entire range for one big blind, and some other stuff can just go for a small overbet, and your opponent will have a lot of difficulty playing against that. They have a lot of difficulty playing against a very small bet, and they have a lot of difficulty playing against a very big bet. And we know that most players are like that. They just have no idea what to do when the bet size isn't between like half the pot and the pot. So yeah, that was Jack 8-3. Here, so the King Queen 3. Yeah, you're right about that. It's difficult to have too many two pairs. Right. Mainly the two pairs are like the weaker ones. There's not a lot of too many offsuit two pairs, and so you get this sort of very split sizing where you have a very small bet size with most of your range, like almost your entire range, and then the rest of it is an overbet, around 8.5%. And I guess a player that doesn't overbet, doesn't know how to respond against overbets, you could bet maybe one big blind with 70% of your range, and then the remaining 30% of your range can overbet. Like here, Ace King is indifferent between the two. But if your opponent doesn't know how to play against an overbet, you could always overbet Ace King against them, right? Because you know you're going to make more money that way. else I want to say? Yeah, 10-3-2 is another thing. Yeah, some overbetting. It's really, you can just say the ranges. Like maybe you don't like opening 2%. So maybe you don't like opening 2 big blinds. Maybe like opening to 2.1 or whatever. Then you're gonna have slightly different ranges, and then slightly different boards where overbetting makes more sense. But then again, the SPR is going to be lower too. So there's all those considerations to think about. I presented on Zenith what happens when you open to 2 big blinds. When you open to 2 big blinds, when the board comes with a high card and 2 low cards, which doesn't hit them very well, you can start having some overbets with overpairs, or when they come ace king, ace queen, king queen. Then you can start having overbetting range. All right, so yeah, that's most of what I have to teach you guys for this session. Do you guys have any questions? Do you want to go through some of the do you guys have any overbet hand examples where we want to talk about?
So just a quick question, Thomas. These sims are up on the library, yeah?
4 span and 5 span is, I think. I'm still building up. Actually, no, wait. 4 span, 5 span, 6 linked is I'm still making 6 span. So I haven't shown you too many 6 span ones in this one.
Okay.
6 span should be next, and they should have quite a few. So yeah, 6 linked, 5 span, 4 span. They'll have some flop overbets in them.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I can't thank you enough, Thomas. This was really excellent. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
This is really excellent. I mean, obviously we need to spend some time going through these sims to look at the tutorial again and let it really sink in, but this is really good, Thomas.
Is it bad that I'm just excited to get to a table and overbet?
Yeah.
I'm going to do a bankroll tonight.
Yeah, next time I play live, I'm almost afraid to do it because everyone can look at me like, what is this guy smoking? Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll try it out online where no one can see me. No, it's really good, Thomas.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Thank you very much.
All right, great. So yeah, if you guys don't have any questions relating to this, no more questions, then I'll turn the recording off and then we have a chat afterwards.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, good.
All right, thanks. Anyone who's watching at home, if you have any questions, you can just message me. All right, I'll turn the recording off now.